Welcome to Let's Talk About It. I'm Sheena.
And I'm Tamara.
And today we are doing questions about relationships. So these are listener questions that came in during our brief hiatus. And now we're answering them today. Tamara, are you ready with all your research?
I'm ready. Shall we begin?
Yes, let's get started with the first question.
Okay, so the first question comes from Kia Munoz, and it's how to be with someone but still be yourself.
She also states that she's finding it hard to set time aside for her own activities and she feels guilty about doing something without her partner.
So how do you deal with that?
Well, that's a great question. I know that this is something that a lot of couples struggle with, especially in the beginning of the relationship when everything is new and you feel like you should be with this person 24/7 and it's very exciting being together. And then you start realizing that this person actually doesn't love doing, the lesfic related book club chats the way you do. And then what?
It's not at all a specific example. Okay, so I think, there's a couple of things at play here. So firstly, you feel guilty, right? You're in a couple, so you feel like you need to like whatever it is that the other person likes, right?
Absolutely.
The problem with that is who gets precedent? So whose needs fall to the wayside and whose needs always gets dealt with, basically. Okay, so the thing to remember here is that you still are two individuals in a relationship. You are not a merged entity, and this requires some sort of compromise. Not that I like the word compromise because I feel like it has negative connotations, but I think let's use it for the want of a better word. So you need to remember that you've both come into a relationship with a history, with your own likes, with your own beliefs. Okay, so going forward, you need to retain these so that you are still yourself. I mean, you each fell in love with each other for the person that you are, not for some sort of weird non-person that you'll become if you keep letting stuff you like slide.
So I think your basic point is make sure you keep your individuality within the relationship.
Yes, and I think something that's very important is not to let other people remove your individuality either. And this is something that we have experienced as a couple, where people will, think of us as a unit instead of two people. So like they might discount, what you want to do because I'm there. So they'll just ask me and they won't think about your opinion, for example.
So what we did to overcome this is we deferred to the other person a lot. So if somebody asked me about plans or something, I would say, I need to check with you first.
Yes. And a lot of the times we're also very clear with people that we are two people and not one person as well. Because you do have to set that boundary.
Now, in terms of taking some time out for yourself, how do you do this without feeling guilty?
Okay. So I think, the first thing you need to remember is that your relationship with yourself comes first, okay? Not your relationship with the other person. As difficult as that is to understand, for you to be happy in the long term, you need to be good with yourself, okay? So don't do things that are going to make you depressed. Don't do things that are going to make you angry or sad. Secondly, the other person will never be more important to me than I am to myself. And thirdly, I will always love myself more than another person. And this isn't to say that you're going to discount your relationship or love the other person any less. It's to retain that individuality within yourself.
What that manages to do, though, as well, is it means that somebody's taking care of you emotionally. And if you're able to put in that boundary and say to your spouse, listen, spouse, I need some time out to do some me stuff. I need a pedicure. I know you don't like pedicures. That's totally cool. I'm going to go with my friend, or I'm just going to go by myself and get a pedicure. Your spouse, if they're doing the same thing, will understand that the time out is important for both of you.
Mm-hmm. And love is that. Love is, recognizing what the other person needs and letting them have it. And, sometimes that means not making them do everything with you, for example.
So the balance here is trying to make sure that you have enough quality time as a couple, but I say quality time and not just time, right? Because if you have enough quality time as a couple, then what happens is there isn't that much resentment when there's me time needed. So if you are spending enough time as a couple doing things that you love together, then that bond stays strong and it allows you for the time for yourself to do what you need for your own personal satisfaction and health.
And I think something to keep in mind is that when you are taking some downtime for yourself or alone time, it's to make sure that you spend that time doing quality things, right? So it's knowing yourself and knowing what matters to you. So if you get time to yourself, don't just spend it on the couch watching TV. You can do that every now and then, but use the time to do something that strengthens your sense of self. So if you have a hobby, engage in that hobby. If you're missing your friends, go spend time with your friends. So do stuff which matters to you. And then also remember to make sure that you keep pursuing your own goals in life as well.
I want to also just have a quick side note here that in your alone time, you can also have alone time. And that's also perfectly fine and natural within a relationship. You don't have to feel bad about that either.
No, not at all. So, being true to yourself means basically doing stuff that you know you love and making sure that you still have time for that within a relationship.
So balance your time wisely and spend quality time with yourself and your partner. That's basically the answer to that.
Yeah. So, Kia, I hope that helped answer that question.
I also think have a frank conversation with your partner and say, listen, it's not that I don't love you, but I just feel like there's stuff that we don't need to do together that I just need some time. And that's okay. It's totally okay.
It is. We wish you lots of luck here for you and your partner, and I hope you manage to get back that little sense of self that you've lost.
Absolutely.
Okay, so our next question is from Brenda Murphy, and she's asking basically about money in relationships.
So Brenda says, we don't struggle now, but when my wife and I first started dating, we were in different places financially. One of the best things we did was to make it a point to talk about money openly. I had a full-time job and she was a grad student with a very small stipend. I wanted to pay for everything, but she didn't like it. She wanted it to be fair. No one person picking up dinners, dates, movies, etc. all the time. We came to an agreement about how to make it equal between us. We carried that forward when we married and have a monthly money meeting to sort out bills, etc., as our money is held jointly. I know more than a few couples who struggle with control and financial decisions, and financial stress and incompatibility is often listed as a reason for divorce. It's a fraught subject and it's something that's definitely worth talking about. Brenda, this is absolutely one of the highest reasons people find tension within a relationship is money.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have it, you don't know how to spend it, and money naturally comes with this power dynamic as well.
Exactly. And I think that's probably one of the biggest problems with money besides stress is the power dynamic. So whenever someone earns more, whether that's $1 more than the other person, there's always going to be an imbalance. So it's dealing with that in the relationship. And when there is times when there isn't enough money, it's dealing with the stress of financial instability.
Right. So here's an example. When you and I were both working for the same company, I earned more money than you, and so I would take on more of the bills. Yeah. But then we both lost our jobs and you got another job, and so now you earn significantly more money than me. So we had to make quite a transition to where you paid the bills. And I know for me, that was a very emotionally difficult time because I went from somebody who was used to being the provider, if you like, to somebody who needed to be provided for. Mm-hmm. And that was a difficult transition for me because there is a power dynamic. And even though I didn't feel like you were less than me, I now felt less than you, if that makes sense.
No, I get that. And it's not that, that's true at all, but it is still that thing within a person's self feeling that way. Okay, so, there is some advice from financial experts when it comes, and relationship experts when it comes to money. And Brenda is doing a lot of it right. Okay, so the first thing they say is talk about money. Okay, so don't keep it secret. So this includes debt, even if it's debt that you got before your relationship. Talk about it because it's going to affect both of you. Talk about your salaries. Talk about what savings you have. And more importantly, if you're a couple that doesn't pool their money into a central sort of bank account or everyone's got different responsibilities with the money, you need to be able to be open and tell the other person when you aren't able to afford something. Okay. So, for example, some couples, if they go out for dinner, they each pay part of the bill. They don't pay it as one bill. Okay. So, if or if they go away on holiday, they will share the expenses of the holiday instead of it coming from some sort of shared fund, right? So if you have a dynamic where someone earns a lot more than the other, there will be cases when one person just simply can't afford it. And a lot of times the person who can't afford it simply goes along because they feel bad or they feel embarrassed. And that creates quite the problem. So the thing is, in those cases, you need to be able to tell the other person that you can't afford it, and the other person needs to be able to understand about that.
So basically open discussion and planning meetings and figuring out how best to split the money. Obviously, if you're in a situation where one person is earning significantly more than the other person, there is no way around the fact that the person who's earning more is going to take on more of the financial responsibility. It just is what it is. But I think being open and honest about it and talking about it and dealing with all the feelings that come with that is a very important part of keeping the relationship stable.
You're listening to the Lesbian Talk Show. TheLesbianTalkShow.com, your hub of podcast information.
And then, okay, the next thing to be successful at money management as a couple is to, in some way, have a joint bank account or to share your finances in some way. So apparently couples who keep completely separate bank accounts and who, they assign their paychecks for different things have a much harder time of working through money trouble together. So couples who either have joint bank accounts or who share financial responsibilities together actually have a much better go of it.
What does that mean, though? Does that mean so I always pay the electricity bill, you always pay the house bond, or does this mean... I don't quite understand.
So experts actually recommend having a joint bank account, but this isn't always possible. In South Africa, for example, joint bank accounts don't exist. Even if you're married, you just can't have one. So how we get around this is that we have different bank accounts for different expenses, basically. So we'll have one bank account that's dedicated to paying things like electricity and the mortgage, and then like another bank account where all the funds for groceries for the month goes into, and we both have credit cards linked to that account so that we can draw from it. We're also, through online banking, are able to see what money is in the accounts. There is still that transparency, even though it isn't the traditional joint account. Okay, because it's all about being able to share it and see where the money is.
Absolutely. Now, the power dynamics with money extends to beyond cash itself. Mm-hmm. The next question is from Sandy Unger, and her question is, your house, my house, or something we buy together. So this is once again the power dynamics of money and how it and property is a big part of money, right? Yeah. So I know people who move in with other people and it's the initial person's house. Yes. And it never becomes our house. It's always my house or your house. And I think that that's a really bad dynamic.
Yeah. Look, I think it also depends on whether you're purchasing the house or if you're just moving into someone's house that they already own or a house that they already rent or whatever it is. Right?
On a personal level, I would much prefer it if we moved in together completely.
I agree, but it's not always something feasible either. I mean, I think there are situations where whether you live in a city that housing is really expensive and difficult to find and you have a place that you can afford and is really great, you probably wouldn't want to move out of there, right? So I think, it depends on the situation.
Okay, so how do you make it less mine and more ours?
Again, this depends on the dynamic greatly. Okay, so if you're going to buy a house together, there needs to be some sort of contract in place which states who owns what or what percentage of this house that you're buying, right? Especially if you're not married, because if you separate, what do you do with the house? Whereas if you're divorced, there's legal proceedings and stuff that go with it and with the split of the property. But I think, especially if you're not married, you need to make sure that there's a contract in place so that you know exactly who owns what. So never have a situation where you only have one person's name on the papers for the house.
Yeah.
If you're renting a house and there is some sort of power dynamic at play there, maybe see if there's a way of including the other person's name on the lease. So it's not just whoever had the lease first, just so that you can level off that dynamic as well. So Sandy, I think the important things to remember when it comes to buying a house, and whether it's yours, mine, or ours, is to go in knowing who's going to pay for the house. Are you splitting it? Yes or no? Who do you want to be on the papers that's for the property ownership? And thirdly, you need to have a contract in place if you're not married, beyond just the paperwork for the ownership of the house. And you also need to have a plan for what's going to happen to that house should you split.
Or should you die? Because property is one of these things where, okay, so now you both die in, say, a car accident. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But if it does happen, what happens to the house? Yes. Do you have a will in place?
It's true. Very true. And also, just in terms of while your relationship is happy and while you're still alive, how are you going to split the costs? Because if it is one of these situations where one of you earns more than the other, are you going to split it 50-50? Do you have a shared pool of money that you're just going to, use to pay the house? How does that work? And how does that figure into percentage of ownership as well?
And repairs on the house, who's going to pay for that? And, oh my gosh, house owning is a whole nother thing. Okay. I think that's it for this episode. Patrons are going to get an extra 2 questions after this. They're going to get the question about power dynamics, and not the intentionally orchestrated ones that are fun. And they're going to get a question on living in a place that doesn't accept your relationship, and we're going to talk about both of those. So that's coming up shortly in the Patron exclusive. If you are a patron and you're listening to this through the Patron exclusive podcast, then stay tuned, because that's coming up next. If you're not a patron, then consider becoming a patron, because you get access to extra things like the answer to those questions. I'm Sheena.
And I'm Tamara.
And you've been listening to Let's Talk About It. We're almost finished with the relationship season. We have only 1 episode left. So if you enjoyed it, be sure to email us on podcast@thelesbiantalkshow.com and tell us what you want us to talk about in the next season of Let's Talk About It. So this was the relationship season, and we're starting to research our next season. So email us.
Bye.
Bye.